Welcome to Forbes Newsroom. Joining me now is Sara Dorn, politics reporter here at Forbes. Sara, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Brittany. Thank you for having me.
Sara, lawmakers have narrowly averted a government shutdown. Can you explain how we got here?
Yes, so lawmakers have until Friday, December 16th at midnight to pass what is known as a continuing resolution. And this would keep the government funded at fiscal year 2022 levels. The fiscal year expired on September 30th, and they passed a continuing resolution then to keep the government funded again through Friday at midnight. The House passed this short-term stopgap measures, it's also known, on Wednesday night, and the Senate is expected to take it up on Thursday or, by Friday at midnight. And this would fund the government through December 23rd. And lawmakers are hoping to hash out an agreement by that point for a full year funding package for fiscal year 2023. This is known as an Omnibus package because it encompasses 12 bills. That the Democrats are hoping to do that before the end of the year and before the Republicans take control of the House next year and have a lot more leverage in negotiating their spending priorities. But on the Republican side, they are hoping for a continuing resolution early into next year so they can negotiate the full year package with more Republican leverage in Congress. So it'll be interesting to see how the Senate handles this, because there are even some senators who are putting up a last minute fight on extending the current continuing resolution that was passed by the House on Wednesday early into next year.
Well, let's talk about what is going to happen come December 23rd.
So lawmakers are trying to hash out an agreement on what is referred to as an omnibus bill. It's 12 pieces of legislation that has to pass at the end of every fiscal year, again, to keep the government up and running. Republicans are hoping to pass another continuing resolution, or there are even some Senate Republicans who are vying in the vote to extend the resolution passed by the House past December 23rd. So when Republicans take over the House, they can negotiate an entirely new funding package for fiscal year 2023. And that would run through September 30th of next year. So that, again, Republicans are hoping to extend the deadline for the short-term measure. Democrats, on the other hand, want to pass this omnibus deal before the end of the year, before Republicans take over the House, so they can have more leverage in deciding, where the appropriations go.
And what's the most likely outcome here?
Senate leader, Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is vying, or so he says publicly, to negotiate an omnibus deal. And, in the Senate, it requires 10 Republican votes to get this done, to reach the 60 vote threshold for a filibuster, to avoid a filibuster. So the Senate is where really the heavy lifting and negotiating is happening. On the House side, it's, currently Democrats have the majority. And so Kevin McCarthy is able to publicly come out against any omnibus deal. But privately, it's said that, he too hopes to pass an omnibus measure that would fund the government, through September 30th under whole new parameters next year, just to avoid this haggling at the beginning of his tenure and a possible government shutdown, which is even more likely to happen under a Republican-controlled House next year, than it would be now.
Kevin McCarthy has had a leadership battle. We've talked about this before, but would passing the omnibus bill further complicate that?
In some ways, yes, because it would, he has already voted. He doesn't have to vote for the omnibus bill. No Republicans do, as long as the majority of Democrats do in the House. So he is able to, again, publicly oppose this bill, and it curries favor with the coalition of conservatives who are really pushing to have the continuing resolution extended early into next year, so the Republican-controlled House can negotiate the full year package. But no new leader wants to deal with a fight over a government shutdown early in their tenure. And there's a chance that conservatives could, for lack of a better word, hold moderates and Democrats, moderate Republicans and Democrats hostage essentially in the next session of Congress and force this government shutdown. And publicly, that would look very bad on Kevin McCarthy, as it does on any leader, because no American really wants a government shutdown. It would, yes, make some kind of a statement on the extreme side, but from a governing perspective, this would not go over well with the public. It rarely does.
Let's talk about that. How likely is a government shutdown to happen?
Well, if the omnibus bill, it's unlikely to happen this year. If the omnibus bill happens, then, we're in the clear through September 30th of next year. But again, it's more likely to happen next year under a split Congress, because not only would the House have to, appease this coalition of conservatives in crafting the new budget, they obviously want to make cuts to Biden's agenda. I mean, that's their entire initiative and platform, is they want to cut all kinds of social spending programs. But it would also have to appeal to a Democratic controlled Senate. So that is a lot harder ask when, the situation we're in now is we have two chambers who are controlled by Democrats. And we have Mitch McConnell, who is willing to recruit the Republican votes needed in the Senate to reach that filibuster threshold.
You said that Americans don't like a government shutdown, and this seems like definitely a last case resort. But politically, are there any winners when this happens?
So I want to point back to 2018, 2019, the last time this happened, because I feel like it's a good example. It was over border wall funding, which was just such a hot button issue and something that, Trump's base cared so much about that they could get away with a government shutdown. But in this case, I don't think that there is any one, major item that would warrant this in the eyes of the American public.
And you mentioned what Republicans are pushing for, what Democrats are pushing for. But in order to compromise here, which side is going to have to concede more?
Next year, I would say that it would be Democrats, because, again, the House will be controlled by Republicans. And it does seem like, again, Mitch McConnell is willing to work on the Senate side with Democrats to reach a deal that they are both comfortable with. But yeah, I mean, Democrats want to spend more, and they are working off Biden's budget. It's what he has proposed and put forth already. That is the framework. So, things like climate initiatives, expansion of the Child Tax Credit Act, funding for Ukraine, those are all things that are kind of on the chopping block.
And as we head into 2023, what should we look for next?
Well, I would say definitely a legislative stalemate. There's not going to be a lot of legislation passed next year at all, but I think it's really going to be interesting to see, and you're seeing it playing out now with the budget negotiations, with McCarthy's negotiations regarding House rules for next year. There is this faction of conservatives in Congress that, as of now, his hands are tied because he needs their votes for the speakership. He is likely to win the speakership. Might be like a messy floor fight, something that's a bit unprecedented. But once he wins the speakership, they won't have as much control, but they will certainly have more leverage than was expected before the midterms, because Republicans were supposed to have a lot greater of a majority in the House. But at the same time, there is a coalition of moderates who, one of the headlines today was McCarthy is kind of playing good cop, bad cop with these two factions of Congress. And he is able to use those moderates to kind of say what he can't say to the conservative faction right now, because he needs their votes for speaker. And for example, the headline that I referred to was regarding these rules changes in the House.
Sara Dorn, we have a lot to look forward to, and I hope you join us to break it all down. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brittany.